The moment her driver said Ms. Hayes, his entire world collapsed. High above a cold Manhattan night, a billionaire blew out her birthday candles alone. No guests, no calls, no love. But just as she whispered to herself that the world had forgotten her, a child's voice rose from the rain below. That tiny voice would lead her to a single dad and his little girl, and nothing in her life would ever be the same again. Rain had been falling over Manhattan since dawn, a cold, steady curtain that blurred the skyline into soft silhouettes. From the top floor of the Hayes Tower, the city looked like a distant dream, alive, sparkling, but impossibly far from the woman standing alone behind the floor-to-ceiling glass. Caroline Hayes rested one hand against the chilled window, watching headlights smear across the wet streets 30 floors below. The world kept moving. People kept living. And yet, on her 52nd birthday, she stood in a penthouse big enough to host 100 guests and could not think of a single person who might walk through the door. The dining table behind her was set for one, a single white plate, a single fork, a single napkin folded with unnecessary precision. In the center sat a small chocolate cake, untouched except for the tiny pink candle flickering sadly at the top. She had lit it an hour earlier, more out of habit than celebration. No one had ever said billionaires should enjoy eating cake alone, but tonight she felt like the only woman in Manhattan carrying the weight of her success like a punishment. Her phone lay face down beside the cake. It hadn't buzzed. Not once. Not from friends. She didn't have many left. Not from family. There was no one. And not from the thousands of employees who owed their salaries to her company. She tried telling herself it didn't matter, that she was used to this, that solitude was the price of ambition. But when she picked up the knife and dragged it through the soft frosting, cutting the smallest slice for herself, something inside her chest tightened painfully. The clink of the knife against the ceramic plate sounded too loud in the vast room. She carried the piece to the table, sat down, and stared at it for a long time before taking a taste. It was sweet, gentle, the kind of flavor that should have brought joy. Instead, it only reminded her she hadn't shared a meal with another person in months. A gust of wind slammed rain against the windows, and the lights in the distance dimmed behind streaks of water. Manhattan was alive with motion. Sirens, buses, people hurrying home with umbrellas fighting the storm. But up here, the penthouse felt suspended outside of time. No footsteps, no laughter, no voices, only the hum of the refrigerator and the soft tap of rain. She tried to remember when birthdays had last meant something. Her mother used to bake a messy vanilla cake covered with too many sprinkles. Her father would put on old jazz records. They'd all dance around the kitchen. That was decades ago, back when Caroline was still a daughter, not a CEO. Back when she let people close enough to disappoint her. Work had slowly replaced everything, friends, holidays, weekends, and as the years passed, the world she built grew taller, richer, louder, while her personal life shrank until it barely existed. People respected her, people feared her, but no one truly knew her. And tonight, that truth pressed harder than it ever had. She stood up, restless, pacing across the polished floors. Her reflection followed her in the darkened window. Expensive dress, perfect hair, posture sharp as steel. The image of a woman who had it all. A lie she was tired of carrying. She set her hands on the glass again and whispered to no one, "Is this really it? Is this what's left of my life?" The rain eased for a moment, the steady rhythm softening. The city lights sharpened through the fading drizzle. Caroline let her eyes drift downward, toward the sidewalk far below where tiny figures hurried through puddles. Something about watching strangers always soothed her, proof that life happened with or without her permission. And then she heard it. Faint at first. A small, clear sound threading up from the street. A melody. A voice. Soft, high, innocent. She leaned closer, confused. The voice grew stronger, carrying against the wet pavement as if the rain itself was amplifying it. Happy birthday to you. Her breath caught. Happy birthday to you. No, it couldn't be. No one knew, no one was here. Happy birthday, dear lady. The words floated up through the night, impossibly gentle, impossibly close. Caroline pressed her palm flat against the cold window, staring downward in disbelief, searching for the source of that tiny, hopeful voice rising from the soaked Manhattan sidewalk. And just like that, the loneliness inside her cracked, not from comfort, but from the shock that someone, somewhere in this massive city, was singing her name into the rain. She blinked hard, heart pounding, her breath fogging the glass. Who was singing? And how? How did they know? Caroline pressed her forehead gently against the cold glass as the last few notes drifted upward, carried by the damp night air. For a moment she wondered if she was imagining it. Loneliness could play tricks on the mind, especially on a night like this. But then she heard it again. A small giggle, light and high, followed by the soft shuffle of shoes splashing through shallow puddles. She squinted, eyes sweeping the sidewalk far below until they caught the faint glow of a street lamp and the silhouettes standing beneath it. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, holding an umbrella that had clearly lost a battle with the wind. And next to him, a tiny girl in a bright red raincoat, hood slipping down over her curls as she attempted to keep her balance on the slick concrete. The little girl was the source of the voice. Caroline could see her tiny hands cupped around her mouth as if she were calling up to the sky. The child tipped her head back, eyes searching the heights, and Caroline felt her heart jump. It was as if the girl was looking straight at her, through the storm, through the glass, through everything that had kept Caroline separated from the world for so long. She took a step back from the window. Another. She wasn't sure why. Perhaps she didn't want to be seen. Perhaps the attention, even from a stranger, felt too intimate, too undeserved. But she couldn't stay away. She found herself drifting back, watching through the rain-smeared glass as the girl tugged on the man's sleeve. The man, Andre, though she didn't yet know his name, leaned down, listening. The child pointed up toward the building, then hugged herself for warmth. Caroline saw the man smile softly and place his hand on her small head, gently adjusting the loose hood. The father said something Caroline couldn't hear, but whatever it was made the girl nod eagerly. Then she began hopping in place, splashing water around her boots. Her joy felt brighter than the street lamp above her, warmer than the glowing towers of the city. In that moment, Caroline had the absurd thought that she wanted to walk outside, right into the storm, just to feel that same warmth. The girl's voice floated up again, clearer this time now that the wind had briefly settled. "Did she hear me, Daddy?" The words struck Caroline in the chest like a physical touch. She lifted a hand to the window again, palm trembling. The man answered, his voice too deep for her to catch, but his tone was tender, patient, fatherly in a way that stirred something long buried inside her. He held the umbrella sideways to shield the child from the heaviest rain, even though it left his own shoulders exposed to the storm. A subway train rumbled beneath the street, sending a faint vibration up the building. The little girl's song faded with the noise, leaving the sidewalk quiet except for the rain. Then the pair began walking again, the girl's hand swinging from her father's as they moved toward the nearest bus stop. Caroline should have turned away. She should have let the moment slip into memory like so many others. But instead, she found herself rushing to the elevator, grabbing her coat on instinct. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe it was the song. Or maybe the child's kindness had filled a hollow space inside her that she didn't even know she still had. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding. Caroline stepped inside, heart pounding. As the elevator descended, the numbers blinking steadily downward, she wondered what exactly she planned to do. She didn't know these people. They didn't know her. Yet something about the girl's voice kept echoing inside her. The innocence, the sincerity, the simple act of caring enough to sing into the rain for a stranger. The lobby was warm compared to the storm outside. The doorman, startled to see her at this hour, gave a stiff nod, but Caroline barely noticed. She stepped out onto the sidewalk and was hit by the cold instantly. Rain soaked the shoulders of her coat within seconds, and the wind tugged at her hair, but she barely felt any of it. Her eyes swept the street. A city bus hissed to a stop across the road, its headlights cutting through the dark. And there, under the bus shelter, stood the little girl and her father. The girl was swinging her feet against the bench, humming to herself. The man rubbed his hands together for warmth, glancing down the street impatiently. Caroline hesitated at the edge of the crosswalk. She didn't know what she would say. What explanation could possibly make sense? "Hello, I heard you singing. Thank you for remembering my birthday. You don't know me, but you made me feel less alone." None of it sounded sane. Before she could decide, the bus doors folded open with a clatter. The father lifted the girl, guiding her carefully up the steps. Caroline's breath caught. She couldn't let them leave. Not yet. Not when she didn't even know their names. And then something unexpected happened. The little girl turned around on the bus steps, leaning out just far enough to peek through the rain. Her eyes scanned the sidewalk and landed right on Caroline. Even across the distance, even through the storm, Caroline felt the connection like a spark. The girl lifted her tiny hand and waved, a simple wave, pure, unfiltered, the kind of gesture that didn't expect anything in return. Caroline lifted her own hand slowly, almost afraid it would break the moment. The girl smiled, big, bright, unmistakably joyful, before her father gently ushered her inside. The bus pulled away, taillights disappearing down the avenue. Caroline stood in the rain long after it was gone, her hand still raised, her heart beating too fast. Her breath trembling with something she couldn't name yet. Not hope, not exactly, but something close. And she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She couldn't let the moment end here. Not after hearing that voice. Not after that wave. Not after feeling less alone for the first time in years. And so, soaking wet under the Manhattan rain, Caroline made a quiet decision, one that would pull her out of the penthouse and into a world she had forgotten how to touch. She would find that little girl again. No matter what it took, the rain hadn't let up by the next evening. It came in soft, steady sheets, drumming against the windows of Caroline's penthouse like a reminder that the world outside was waiting for her. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the red raincoat, the small waving hand, the smile that sliced clean through the loneliness she'd been drowning in for years. She didn't know the girl's name. She didn't know the father's. All she had was the memory of a voice singing upward into a storm. Carolyn stood in front of her mirror, trying to look less like the woman who appeared in magazines, less intimidating, less polished, less unreachable. She tied her hair back, swapped her tailored suit for a thick sweater, pulled on dark jeans, and stepped into boots she hadn't worn since a retreat in Colorado 3 years ago. She hesitated before taking off her diamond earrings, setting them neatly on the dresser. Tonight, she didn't want to shine. She wanted to blend in. She grabbed her coat and headed to the elevator, ignoring her driver who offered to prepare the car. She waved him off gently. "I'll walk." "In this weather, ma'am?" "Yes," she answered simply. The city's cold met her immediately. Manhattan smelled of wet asphalt, street vendors closing up their carts, steam rising from subway grates. Caroline pulled her hood over her hair as she retraced the path she had seen the night before. The bus stop wasn't far, just 3 blocks down, 1 block to the right, past a corner deli and a shuttered bookstore. She didn't expect to find them there. She just hoped. But sometimes hope surprises you. There, standing beneath the flickering bus shelter light, was the man, Andre, and beside him, the tiny girl in the same soaked red raincoat, humming as she swung her legs from the metal bench. She had a backpack with a unicorn patch, too worn to sparkle anymore. Caroline stopped halfway across the street, startled by how relief rushed through her like a warm wave. She'd found them. Her heart hammered against her ribs, too loudly for someone who didn't know what she would say. She approached slowly, careful not to startle them. The shelter's roof dripped unevenly, creating a rhythm of water drops that echoed in the quiet street. The girl noticed her first. Her eyes widened, not in recognition of who Carolyn was, but in that open, unguarded way children have when they spot someone familiar in spirit. "You!" the girl chirped, hopping off the bench. "You're the birthday lady!" Caroline froze, then let out a small laugh. "Yes, I suppose I am." Andre turned around, eyebrows lifting slightly. He looked tired, exhausted actually, but his eyes held a warmth even through the fatigue. He straightened, offering a polite nod. "Evening, ma'am," he said. "Good evening," Caroline replied, though her voice trembled in the cold. The girl tugged her father's sleeve. "Daddy, I told you she heard me." Andre smiled at his daughter, but when he looked back at Caroline, something like embarrassment flickered across his face. "I'm sorry if she bothered you last night," he said. She likes to help people feel better, even strangers." "It wasn't a bother," Caroline said quietly. "It meant more than you know." Andre offered her a searching look, one that seemed to measure her sincerity. She held his gaze, refusing to let the old instinct, distance, guardedness, slip back into place. "Are you headed somewhere?" she asked. Andre rubbed his palms together, breath fogging in the cold. "Home, laundry night, then dinner, if I can throw something together quick enough." The girl chimed in proudly. "Daddy makes the best cornbread in Brooklyn." That made Caroline smile, really smile, in a way that softened the hard edges of her face. She hesitated only a second before speaking. "Would you mind if I joined you for dinner?" Andre blinked. Once. Twice. The idea clearly stunned him. He glanced at the girl, who was already nodding with the enthusiasm of someone being offered a trip to Disneyland. "Please, Daddy, she can come. She looks cold." He exhaled in a quiet huff that might have been a laugh. "Well, we don't have much, but if you don't mind simple food—" "I would love simple food," Carolyn said. It was the truth. She hadn't had a simple meal in years. Everything in her life came catered, curated, plated by Michelin-trained hands. But the thought of a warm meal in a modest apartment, shared with people who didn't expect anything from her, felt more luxurious than anything her wealth could buy. They headed toward the bus together. Andre lifted Mia onto the steps, then held out a hand to help Caroline. She took it before she could think, surprised by how steadying it felt. The bus smelled like wet coats and old vinyl seats, but the ride was oddly comforting. Caroline sat across from them, trying not to appear awkward. She watched as Mia pressed her face to the window, drawing little shapes in the fog with her finger. Andre leaned back, eyes half closed, the weight of the day hanging from his shoulders. They got off near a row of old brick walk-ups, the kind with iron stair rails and narrow hallways. The lighting was dim, and the elevator creaked as if unsure whether it wanted to work tonight. They climbed the stairs instead. Andre unlocked his apartment, a tiny unit with peeling wallpaper and a couch patched with tape. It smelled like cornbread, cinnamon, and the faintest hint of lavender laundry detergent. It was small, imperfect, lived in, and the warmth hit Caroline like a soft embrace. "Please, make yourself at home," Andre said. The girl tugged her hand. "Sit with me. Daddy's gonna make dinner." Caroline nodded, feeling strangely shy. "I'd like that." While Andre moved into the tiny kitchen, Mia chatted non-stop about school, her favorite songs, her dreams of becoming a singer. She showed Caroline her drawings on the fridge, each one bright and hopeful. Caroline listened, completely absorbed, feeling something loosen in her chest with every word the child spoke. Dinner was simple. Beans simmered in a worn pot, cornbread baked in an old metal pan, and a small basket of apples in the center of the table. Nothing fancy, nothing pretentious. But every bite tasted like comfort she hadn't felt in decades. And then came the moment that broke her. Mia reached into the pocket of her raincoat and placed a single cookie, slightly crushed, on Caroline's plate. "It's my favorite," the girl said. "I want you to have it." The room went silent for a breath too long. Caroline swallowed hard, blinking fiercely. "Thank you, sweetheart. That's very kind." The girl grinned. "Everybody needs something sweet on their birthday." Caroline laughed weakly, trying to hide the tears building behind her eyes. But she couldn't hide the tremble in her voice, or the warmth spreading through her chest, or the simple truth that this tiny act of kindness meant more than any birthday she could remember. It was only later, after dinner, after laughter, after watching Mia fall asleep on the couch, that Caroline stepped back into the hallway, heart fuller than it had been in a lifetime. She didn't know yet how complicated things would get, how cruel the world could be to people like Andre, how this night would change everything. But as she walked down the dim stairwell, Caroline knew one thing for certain. Kindness had found her. And for the first time in many years, she wasn't afraid to follow where it led. But the world has a strange way of punishing gentle moments, especially in places where life has taught people to expect the worst. It happened the very next evening. Caroline stood outside Andre's apartment door, still unsure if she was being too forward, too intrusive, too unfamiliar with how ordinary neighborhoods worked. She had stopped at a bakery on the way, buying a warm loaf of brioche because it reminded her of the bread her mother used to make. It felt like a small thank you for the dinner, though she wasn't sure if it was appropriate. The hallway smelled faintly of old carpet and someone cooking garlic downstairs. Dim bulbs flickered above her, buzzing like tired bees. She lifted a hand to knock, just as the door directly across from Andre's opened with a loud creak. A woman in a faded robe stepped out, her eyes narrowing the moment she saw Caroline. Her voice was sharp, slicing through the silence. "Well, look at that," she muttered loudly enough for the whole floor to hear. "Guess he's upgrading his guests now." Caroline blinked, unsure how to respond. "Oh, I'm just here to..." But the woman was already leaning against her doorframe, arms crossed, gaze dripping with judgment. "You people don't usually come to places like this unless you want something. Don't bring trouble here." The sting was immediate. Caroline felt her throat tighten, memories of boardrooms filled with cold, dismissive stares surfacing in an instant. But before she could speak, another voice echoed from the end of the hall, a deeper voice, irritated and impatient. "Hey! He ain't supposed to bring strangers up here!" The building manager, a broad man with a potbelly and a fluorescent vest, stomped toward her. "This is a low-income complex. We have rules about outside visitors." Caroline stepped back reflexively. "I'm not causing any trouble." But he didn't hear her, or didn't care to. "You can't just show up here looking like you stepped out of a magazine spread," he snapped. "People start thinking things, and this building doesn't need drama." Before she could reply, Andre's door opened. "Is everything okay?" he asked, brows furrowed. The woman in the robe gestured dramatically, Your guest is drawing attention. That kind of attention. You know how this building works. The manager nodded in agreement. Next time, you need to clear visitors with the office. Andre glanced between them, then at Caroline, and shame flared behind his eyes. He stepped fully into the hall, rubbing the back of his neck. Look, man, she's just a friend. Friends don't look like that, the woman hissed. Caroline felt herself shrink despite her best effort to stay composed. Andre squared his shoulders, his voice steady but strained. Enough. She's not bothering anyone. But the damage was done. The hallway had gone quiet, except for the buzzing ceiling light. A door cracked open a few units down, and someone whispered something muffled. Another door shut loudly, as if in protest. Caroline clutched the bag of brioche so tightly, the paper crinkled under her fingers. I shouldn't have come, she whispered. Andre shook his head. No, hey, don't listen to them. They don't know you. The manager scoffed. Well, somebody should know who she is. For safety. You never know what strangers are doing here. The accusation hung in the air. Ugly, heavy, unfair. Caroline felt something twist painfully inside her. She'd been judged before, but never like this. Never as a threat. Never as someone who could endanger others simply by showing up. She forced herself to breathe. Maybe I should go. I'm sorry, Andre. I didn't mean to cause problems. Andre opened his mouth to protest, but Caroline had already turned toward the stairwell. The old metal steps groaned as she descended, the sound echoing through the building like a reminder of how fragile kindness could be. She stepped outside into the cold evening air, tears slipping past her lashes despite her attempts to blink them away. The rain had stopped, but the world still felt wet, cold, and too loud around her. On the second-floor landing, Andre watched her go, jaw clenched, torn between chasing after her and shielding Mia from the tension building inside him. Back in the hallway, the woman in the robe smirked. I told you, she murmured. People like her don't belong here. But Andre heard it, and it cut him deeper than the woman realized. He closed his door gently, leaning against it for a moment. In the dim kitchen behind him, Mia sat at the table coloring little stars on a sheet of paper. She looked up innocently, unaware of the sharp words still hanging in the hallway. Daddy? Is the birthday lady coming today? Andre swallowed hard, forcing a small smile. Maybe another time, baby girl. Yet even as he said it, a part of him wondered if another time had just slipped farther away, farther than either of them could reach. Because kindness had brought Caroline here, but the world outside their little apartment had already begun trying to tear it apart. And neither of them knew just how much worse it would get. Caroline didn't sleep that night. She lay awake in her penthouse, staring at the ceiling as the city hummed far below her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the way Andre's shoulders slumped under the weight of other people's judgment. She heard the building manager's voice calling her a stranger who didn't belong. She heard the whispered words, people like her, as if kindness came with conditions she could never meet. It was strange, how a hallway full of strangers had made her feel more exposed than every boardroom she'd ever stood in. In those rooms, she was powerful, untouchable. In that hallway, she felt like an intruder. By dawn, one thing was certain, she couldn't let that moment be the end. She dressed simply again, sweater, jeans, no jewelry, and headed downtown. There was something she needed to see for herself, something she needed to feel grounded before she returned to the apartment complex again. Her driver was waiting in the lobby, trying not to look surprised when she waved him off once more. I'll walk, she said, pulling up her hood. The city was waking up. Delivery trucks, early commuters, the smell of coffee drifting from small cafes. She let the noise settle her nerves until she reached a familiar corner. The bus stop where she had seen the little girl and her father. The bench was empty now, wet from the night's drizzle. But Caroline sat anyway, imagining Mia swinging her legs here, humming softly while waiting for the bus. Imagining Andre watching over her, tired but attentive, as if every breath he took was measured around making sure his daughter felt safe. Carolyn sighed, fingers tapping the bench softly. She wasn't sure how to fix what had happened, but she knew she had to try. Kindness deserved protection, especially theirs. She headed toward a bakery to buy fresh muffins for them, hoping the gesture might soften yesterday's tension. She held the warm bag close to her chest as she walked back toward the old brick building. She didn't get far. A sleek black town car pulled up beside her at the curb, windows tinted dark. The back door opened, and a familiar voice called out dryly, "Ms. Hayes, you gave us quite a scare." It was her driver, sent by someone else. A second voice followed, much firmer. "Ma'am, please get inside." Caroline froze. She recognized that voice instantly. Marcus Warren, her head of security. Which meant only one thing: her sudden absence had been noticed. The more she tried to live quietly, the more she risked the life she'd built being dragged into the spotlight. "I'm just taking a walk, Marcus." "Not at 6 in the morning in this neighborhood," he said, stepping out of the car, scanning the street. "Your father's old advisors would roll in their graves." She didn't have the energy to fight him. "I'm fine." "You weren't supposed to leave the penthouse," he continued. "At least tell me where you're going." Carolyn straightened. "No." Marcus blinked. "No?" She stepped away from the car. "Have a good morning, Marcus." He hesitated, then sighed, motioning the driver back into the car. "At least let me follow at a distance." "Suit yourself." The car moved slowly behind her, its presence heavy but silent. Carolyn gripped the bag of muffins tighter. When she reached Andre's building, her heart tightened. The wind carried the smells of laundry detergent and coffee through the open doorway. She took the stairs, quietly, carefully. She stopped outside Andre's door, hand raised to knock. She didn't get the chance. A voice echoed down the hallway. "Ms. Hayes?" The building manager stood there, holding a clipboard, his expression changing from annoyance to shock as he recognized her. Oh my, are you?" He fumbled his words. "You're that Hayes? From Hayes Future Tech?" Caroline's stomach dropped. The hallway felt too narrow, the walls too close. The man blinked rapidly, sweat beading on his brow. I didn't know you were that Hayes. Ma'am, forgive anything I said yesterday. We're honored, truly honored, to have someone like you here." His tone was different now. Eager, desperate, almost groveling. It made her skin crawl. Before she could respond, another voice cut in sharply. "Caroline?" She turned. Andre stood in the doorway, Mia at his side, rubbing her sleepy eyes. Andre's expression went stiff when he saw the building manager suddenly bowing his head, stammering apologies. The shift in tone, the sudden respect, the swallowed fear. It told Andre everything. His eyes hardened, not in anger, but in a quiet sort of hurt. "So that's who you are," he said. Caroline tried to speak. "Andre, I can explain." He held up a hand. "No need." The building manager chimed in. "Sir, she's—" "Please don't," Andre snapped, surprising both of them. Mia tugged his sleeve gently. "Daddy?" Andre exhaled, running a palm over his face. I need a minute." Caroline stepped closer, voice soft. "Let me talk to you, please." But Andre shook his head slowly, the weight of realization settling in his shoulders. "You knew what this place was like," he said quietly. "You saw what they said, And you still let me think you were just some woman walking through the rain. I wasn't lying, but you weren't telling the truth either. His words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They struck deeper than anything the manager had said the night before. Mia looked between them, confused but sensing the tension. Caroline swallowed, her voice trembling. I didn't want you to see me the way everyone else does. Andre's jaw tightened. Then you should have trusted me enough to decide that for myself. The pain in his tone was unmistakable, quiet, controlled, but deep. The kind of pain that came from years of being misunderstood. He stepped back into his apartment, pulling Mia gently inside. Goodbye, Caroline. And he closed the door. The hallway went silent. So silent she could hear her own breath shaking. Her muffins felt heavy in her hands. Her chest felt heavier. A second later, she heard the faint click of the lock turning. The building manager tried to speak again, but Caroline didn't hear him. She walked down the stairs, each step echoing her heartbreak, her regret, her sudden understanding of how deeply she had failed. When she stepped outside, the wind hit her full in the face, sharp and cold. She had wanted kindness. She had wanted connection. Instead, she had let her identity turn it into a wound. And as she walked away from the building, head lowered, she knew nothing would ever be the same again. Not for her, not for him, not for the little girl who had sung her back to life in the rain. Caroline walked for nearly an hour without realizing where her feet were taking her. The rain had stopped, but the city still felt soaked with last night's sadness. Traffic passed in slow waves, headlights streaking across the wet pavement, like brief, indifferent glances. She kept her hood up. She didn't want anyone recognizing her. Not today. Her phone vibrated more than once. Marcus, her assistant, her chief financial officer. But she ignored every call. None of it mattered. Not now. Not when every word from Andre replayed in her head like a bruise she kept pressing. You should have trusted me enough to decide that for myself. When she finally stopped walking, she found herself in front of a school playground. The fence rattled in the wind. Tiny backpacks, pink, blue, superhero patterned, bobbed past the gate as parents dropped off their kids. She scanned the crowd without thinking. Mia wasn't there. Of course she wasn't. It was too early. Or maybe Andre kept her home today. Maybe he didn't want her near anything connected to Caroline ever again. The thought pierced deeper than she expected. Caroline leaned against the fence, trying to steady her breath, when a soft voice behind her said, "Ma'am, are you okay?" She turned. An older black woman, short, round glasses, gentle eyes, stood holding a travel mug. She wore a custodian's shirt from the school and studied Caroline carefully, not with suspicion, but with the kind of quiet concern that came from years of noticing when people were hurting. "I'm fine," Caroline said, though her voice cracked. The woman nodded slowly. "My name's Patricia. I clean the classrooms here. You look like somebody's carrying the weight of 3 worlds." A humorless smile tugged at Caroline's lips. "Maybe 4. Patricia didn't pry. She just sipped her coffee, watching the children run inside. Sometimes the world makes a mess of good people, makes them doubt themselves, makes them feel like they owe explanations for things they never meant wrong. Caroline looked at her sharply. "How did you—" "I've lived long enough to know what hurt looks like," the woman said simply. For the first time since Andre closed the door on her, Caroline felt her chest loosen. Just a little. "I made someone feel betrayed," she whispered. "Someone good. Someone who didn't deserve it." Patricia hummed softly. "Being good don't mean you won't bleed. Especially good men. They bleed quiet. Makes it harder to see." Caroline swallowed. "He has a daughter." The woman smiled knowingly. Then he's carrying the world twice. They stood in silence for a moment. Finally, Patricia patted Caroline's arm gently. If you care about him, let him breathe. But don't disappear. Good people got a way of thinking they're alone even when they're not. Caroline blinked back unexpected tears. Thank you. Don't thank me, Patricia said. Just take care of that heart before you lose something real. Patricia walked inside, leaving Caroline alone with her thoughts, but not with the same emptiness as before. She realized then that love wasn't the only thing she was unprepared for. She wasn't used to being seen, really seen, without wealth, power, or fear clouding everything. Someone like Patricia, someone like Andre, they had a way of cutting through all the noise. She took a long breath, wiped her eyes gently, and started walking again. But as she turned the corner of the school building, she saw something that made her freeze. Across the street, from the direction of Andre's apartment, a police car was parked. Two officers stood outside, speaking quietly with someone she couldn't fully see. Then one of them lifted a clipboard. A notice. A citation. Or something worse. Carolyn stepped closer, heart pounding. The officers moved aside just enough for her to recognize the man standing between them. Arms crossed defensively, jaw clenched, exhaustion painted across his face. Andre. He didn't see her yet. One of the officers pointed toward his building, then toward a stack of papers in his hand. Andre shook his head, speaking firmly, but the officer only repeated himself more sternly this time. Carolyn watched as the officer handed Andre a yellow slip, a violation notice, then another. Her stomach turned. This wasn't a noise complaint or a parking ticket. This was something bigger. She moved closer, quiet, in the shadow of a bus shelter. Andre rubbed a hand over his face, frustrated but refusing to show fear. When he finally took the papers, she saw his shoulders drop in defeat before he forced them upright again, because Mia was beside him now, clutching his jacket, trying to be brave. The officers returned to their car. Andre knelt to Mia's level, speaking softly, brushing a curl from her face. She nodded bravely, but Caroline could see the tremble in her little hands. Then Andre stood, gathered the papers, and walked toward the building. That's when he saw her. He stopped cold. Caroline didn't move. She held his gaze from across the street, her heart aching, her hands shaking. Andre looked down at the papers in his grip, then back at her. His voice carried across the quiet morning. You shouldn't be here. Caroline stepped off the curb slowly. Andre, what happened? He shook his head, not angrily, just tired. Nothing you need to fix. I want to help. I don't want your help. The words didn't cut like before. This time, they sounded like a man trying to protect what little dignity he had left. Caroline came closer, but not enough to corner him. Please, just talk to me. Andre breathed out heavily, a man on the edge, a man who'd run out of places to fall. They're saying I violated occupancy codes, that I didn't file some paperwork. They're threatening inspections and fines I can't pay. Her heart twisted. Is this because of me? Because they realized Andre didn't answer. He didn't need to. She felt the truth settle between them like cold smoke. Her presence in his hallway. The exposure of who she was. The building manager suddenly afraid. Someone calling the city to cover their tracks. And Andre, caught in the fallout of her name. Mia tugged his sleeve again. Daddy, I'm cold. He nodded, guiding her toward the door, his voice quiet but steady. Let's go inside. Before stepping in, he looked back at Caroline one last time. Please, stop coming here. And then he disappeared into the building. The door closed. The lock clicked. and the world shrank around Carolyn Hayes. But this time, her loneliness wasn't about herself. It was about him. It was about a child who didn't deserve to see her father punished for someone else's mistakes. It was about the truth slamming into her all at once. Her kindness had brought joy. Her identity had brought harm, and she had no idea how to fix either. The police car drove off, its reflection fading in the puddles on the street. Carolyn stood rooted to the sidewalk, muffled city sounds swirling around her. She was no longer the woman who blew out birthday candles alone. She was no longer the woman who felt invisible. She was something far more dangerous now. A woman determined. A woman who would not let injustice crush the two people who had unknowingly saved her life. Not again. Not ever. By the time Caroline reached the headquarters of Hayes Dynamics, dawn had sharpened into a clear, icy morning, a kind of cold that bit straight through the glass walls of the skyscraper. She walked through the marble lobby with a silence that made employees part like water. They could sense something in the way she moved, in the tightness of her jaw, the focus in her eyes. She wasn't here to negotiate. She wasn't here to soothe anyone's fears. She was here to stop a storm she had accidentally unleashed. The elevator rose 50 floors, its soft hum only making her pulse louder in her ears. Images flashed through her mind like film strips. Mia pressing her face into Andre's coat. Andre's voice. "Please, stop coming here." The police notice clutched in his tired hands. When the elevator doors opened, Diane Porter was already waiting for her. Tall, poised, and polished to the point of coldness, Diane wore a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, look who finally decided to show up. The board has been waiting." Caroline brushed past her without a word. Inside the conference room, 12 board members sat in a sleek oval, their tablets glowing, their expressions sharp with irritation and corporate superiority. They weren't used to being kept waiting. They weren't used to Caroline arriving without makeup, without prep, without armor. But she didn't care. She took her seat at the head. The room fell silent. Diane cleared her throat. "Before we begin, I believe there are concerns that must be addressed. Concerns regarding Ms. Hayes's recent activities." Caroline didn't look at her. "Proceed." Diane stepped forward, projecting a series of photos on the wall screens, grainy shots taken on a phone. Shots of the hallway in Andre's building, shots of Caroline knocking on his door, shots of the night she joined their dinner, seen through a cracked curtain. Someone had followed her. Someone had recorded her. Someone had planned this. The board gasped. Diane continued. "One could argue, Ms. Hayes, that this behavior is unbecoming of a CEO, unbecoming of a leader handling a multi-billion-dollar company, associating with unknown individuals in a low-income neighborhood, compromising your safety, and by extension, this company's image." Caroline's voice cut clean through the room. "Those unknown individuals have names." Diane's smile tightened. "Of course, the man is a single father, unemployed, living in subsidized housing. Hardly the kind of—" "Speak one more word about him," Caroline said quietly, "and you won't finish this meeting." A ripple went through the board. Diane laughed almost pityingly. "There it is. Attachment. Emotion. Exactly why you shouldn't be running this company. You let your personal fantasies dictate your actions." Caroline's jaw flexed. "This isn't about fantasies. It's about basic human dignity." "Dignity?" Diane stepped closer, clicking her heels sharply against the floor. "Tell me, Caroline, do you think the public will care about his dignity when the tabloids run a headline saying a billionaire widow is hiding a secret life in the Bronx? Or that a man like that saw an opportunity and grabbed it? Because that's what these people do. They take, they use, they cling to what they can get." Every word landed like a slap. But not on Caroline, on Andre, on people like him. People who had lifted her out of her loneliest night. People who had shown her more kindness than anyone in this polished room. Caroline stood slowly. The room froze. "When I first built this company," she began, "I did it because I wanted to change the world. I believed in innovation, in connection, in building something that could lift people up." Diane rolled her eyes. "Spare us the mission statement, but somewhere along the way," Caroline continued, "this place forgot what humanity looks like. You forgot what it sounds like. You forgot what it feels like." She pointed at the screen, at the photo of Mia standing in the doorway holding a bowl of soup. "This little girl showed me more compassion in one night than any of you have in 5 years." The room shifted uncomfortably. Diane folded her arms. "Caroline, you are letting sentiment cloud." "No." Caroline shook her head. "For the first time in a long time, I'm seeing clearly." She walked to the center of the room, her voice gaining strength with each word. "That man and his daughter didn't ask me for anything. They didn't want my money. They didn't want favors. They didn't know my name. They helped me because they saw a person in the rain who needed warmth." She paused. "And you want to punish them for it." Diane softened her voice, the quiet, poisonous tone she used when reeling people in. "Caroline, listen to me. You're in pain. You're confused. This attachment is clouding your judgment. Let the adults in the room handle the fallout." Caroline's eyes flashed. "Diane," she said, "you are the fallout." Murmurs exploded around the table. Diane's face hardened. "Are you firing me?" "I'm considering something much bigger," Caroline said calmly. "I'm considering reminding everyone here exactly who built this company and who has the power to rebuild it again." For the first time, Diane's confidence cracked. The board whispered. Screens flickered. Nervous glances traded around the table. Caroline looked at each of them, one by one. "If any of you think I'm stepping down, think again. If you think you can shame people for being poor, think again. If you think I'm going to let a good man get hurt because of something I caused, think again." She placed both hands on the sleek table. "And if you think I don't know exactly what you've been planning while I was grieving and healing, well, you'll find out soon enough." Silence strangled the room. Diane's lips parted, but no sound came out. Caroline collected her tablet, straightened her coat, and walked toward the door. Her heels struck the floor with the conviction of someone reclaiming her entire life. As she opened the door, she said quietly, almost gently, "This meeting is over." The door shut behind her, and the boardroom erupted into whispers. But Caroline didn't hear any of it. She was already moving. Because now she understood something critical, something that lit a fire inside her. If power had been used to hurt Andre, then she would use power to protect him. Fully, publicly, without apology. And very, very soon. New York would tremble with what she was about to do. But while Caroline was still riding the elevator down from the 50th floor, hopeful in a way she hadn't been in years, a different elevator in a different part of the city was rising. Slowly, grumbling, carrying a woman who had no intention of offering hope to anyone. Diane Porter. She stood in the flickering lift of Andre's building, wrinkling her nose at the smell of old paint and damp concrete. Her designer heels clicked impatiently. She hated being here, hated the peeling green hallways, the rusting mailboxes, the faint sound of someone arguing 3 floors down. But most of all, she hated the idea that a man down here had somehow touched Caroline Hayes in a way Diane herself never could. The elevator clanked to a stop. Diane stepped out, smoothing her coat as if to protect it from the air itself. She marched straight toward apartment 3B, heels slicing through silence. She knocked, once sharply. Inside, Andre froze. Mia looked up from the kitchen table where she was coloring, sensing something heavy in her father's sudden stillness. "Daddy?" she whispered. Andre pressed a hand to her back. "Stay here, baby." He opened the door just a crack, and his stomach dropped. Diane Porter stood on the other side like a blade sharpened to perfection. "Mr. Collins?" she said sweetly, though her smile was colder than the hallway. "We need to talk." Andre didn't open the door further. "Whatever you're here for, I'm not interested." "Trust me," she replied, pulling a slim envelope from her bag. "You will be." She forced her way one step inside before Andre could stop her. Her perfume filled the narrow entryway, rich, expensive, and out of place in a space that smelled of old wood, warm food, and childhood crayons. Andre stiffened. "Ma'am, I need you to leave." Diane ignored him. Instead, she scanned the apartment with slow, judgmental eyes. The hand-me-down furniture, the cracked window frame, the tiny paper decorations Mia had taped around the kitchen archway. "This is where she spent the night?" Diane asked, voice dripping with disdain. "The CEO of Hayes Dynamics? In a place like this?" Andre clenched his jaw so hard it hurt. Mia took a step forward from the kitchen. "Daddy, who is she?" Andre held out a hand, gently stopping her. "Go to your room for a second, Mia." "No," Diane said sharply. "Let her stay. She should hear this." Andre's voice darkened. "You don't speak to my daughter." The air tightened between them. Finally, Diane held out the envelope. "Consider this compensation." He didn't take it. "For what?" "For entertaining Ms. Hayes," Diane said. "You did your part. You provided whatever emotional support she was seeking. Now it's time for you to walk away before you create a scandal neither of you can afford." Andre stared at her, stunned. "Is that what you think happened?" "It's what I know happened." She pushed the envelope against his chest. "Take it. It's more than generous. Enough to cover your expenses." Mia's eyes widened at the word expenses. Andre felt something inside him splinter, not loudly, but cleanly, like brittle glass under pressure. "Get out," he whispered. Diane raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "I said, get out." He stepped forward, not threateningly, but with the full weight of a father defending his home, his dignity, and his child. "You think the only reason someone like her could want to spend time with us is because we wanted money? You think we used her?" His voice trembled, not with fear, but with a suppressed storm. "We fed her dinner. We gave her shelter from the rain. My daughter sang for her because she saw a sad woman alone in the cold." Diane's tone sharpened to a knife edge. "People like you always dress it up as kindness." Mia flinched. Andre's breath caught. "Don't talk about my family that way." "Then act like you understand your place," Diane snapped. "Because if you don't cut ties now, I will personally ensure Ms. Hayes sees how toxic this arrangement looks. For her, for the company, for the entire city." Andre's hands curled into fists at his sides, but he didn't raise them. He didn't shout. He simply straightened, breathing through the insult. "Take your envelope," he said quietly, "and leave us alone." Diane hesitated. Not because she felt guilt. She didn't. But because she realized she couldn't manipulate him the way she had expected to. So she turned. Mia found her voice. Small, trembling. "Why are you being mean? We never hurt anybody." Diane paused in the doorway, not bothering to look back. "Little girl, someday, you'll learn the world doesn't work the way you think." Mia's eyes filled with tears. Andre knelt beside her immediately. "Hey, don't listen to her, baby. She doesn't know us." But Mia wasn't crying because she believed Diane. She was crying because she had seen something in her father she rarely saw, a hurt he was trying so hard to hide. Diane walked down the hallway with the same cold authority she had arrived with, and as she entered the rattling elevator, she allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. She thought she had won. But what she hadn't counted on was the tiny pair of footsteps sprinting past Andre, flinging open the apartment door and running after her. "Mia!" Andre shouted, scrambling to follow. The elevator was almost closed when little hands shoved desperately between the doors. They bounced open again. Diane startled. "What on earth?" Mia stood there, tears streaking her cheeks, chest heaving. "You don't get to make my daddy feel small," she cried. "You don't get to." Diane blinked, taken aback for the first time. Andre caught up, breathless, pulling Mia gently into his arms. But Mia wasn't done. She pointed at the envelope still in Diane's hand. "Take it back," she said. "We don't want anything from you. We just wished her happy birthday." The elevator doors opened wider, exposing the empty metal box behind Diane. Cold, sterile, the opposite of everything that lived inside apartment 3B. Diane slowly placed the envelope on the floor. "Suit yourselves, but don't say I didn't warn you." The doors slid shut. Andre held Mia tightly against him, pressing a kiss to her forehead. She trembled in his arms. "I'm sorry, baby," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." But Mia didn't look away from the elevator. She whispered almost to herself, "Why would she do that? We were nice." Andre closed his eyes. He had no answer that wouldn't break her heart. Across the city, at that very moment, Caroline stepped out of her building with fire in her lungs and purpose in her stride, ready to reclaim power and protect the family she'd begun to care for. But she had no idea that Diane Porter had already struck her first blow, and the damage was already bleeding through the halls of a tiny apartment in the Bronx. Caroline arrived home that night with a storm inside her chest, not the kind that destroyed, but the kind that cleared, reshaped, rebuilt. She paced the length of her penthouse, Manhattan's skyline glittering like broken glass behind her. Everything in the city looked so small from this high up. Cars like ants, lights like pinpricks, the whole world reduced to something she could pick up and move if she really wanted to. And she did want to. She wanted to move mountains. She wanted to move the entire city if that's what it took to protect two people who had shown her more decency than anyone she'd known since her husband died. But first, she needed a plan. She stared at her reflection in the dark window, hair out of place, eyes tired, heart pounding with a fire she barely recognized. It felt almost like she was waking up for the first time in years. Then her phone buzzed. Unknown caller. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" There was no voice, only the faintest background noise. A child crying. "Mia?" Caroline breathed. A click. The line went dead. Her chest tightened. She grabbed her coat, rushed out the door, and within minutes, her driver was speeding through Manhattan traffic toward the Bronx. But when she got to Andre's building, when she climbed the stairs, two at a time, when she knocked, no answer. She knocked again, harder. "Andre, it's Caroline. Please, open the door." A neighbor poked her head out. "They ain't here." Caroline turned sharply. "Where did they go?" "Don't know," the woman said, folding her arms. "Some fancy woman came around earlier. Kinda loud, kinda mean. After that, the little girl cried for hours. The dad packed up and left fast." Caroline's stomach dropped. Diane. Of course it was Diane. "Did they say where they were going?" she asked, breath thin. The neighbor shook her head. "Just looked upset. Man had his hand on the girl's shoulder like he was trying to hold her together." Caroline swallowed hard, thanked the woman, and walked back down to the street in a fog of dread. He was gone. They were gone, and she had driven them away without even knowing it. She climbed into the back of her car slowly, her hands shaking. "Take me to headquarters." "Tonight, Miss Hayes?" the driver asked softly. "Tonight," she whispered. "Now." Hayes Dynamics' headquarters was nearly empty by the time she arrived, its silent lobby echoing under her heels. She bypassed security, strode into the elevator, and rode to the executive floor alone. But she didn't feel alone. She felt watched, judged, followed by the ghost of every mistake she had made by trusting the wrong people. When she stepped into her office, lights automatically flicked on, illuminating the room in a soft glow. She walked straight to her desk and opened a secure drawer. From inside, she pulled out a thick folder, the one she'd been avoiding for months. Her late husband's final amendment to the corporate charter. It granted her full authority to reclaim the company at any time. She laid it flat on the desk. The pages glowed under the lamp like something sacred. Then, slowly, she sat. She read through the legal text, lines she had memorized, lines she had once promised never to use unless absolutely necessary. But tonight was necessary. Because power wasn't meant to be a weapon for the highest bidder. It wasn't meant to protect people who exploited others. It wasn't meant to crush kindness. She took out a pen. Her hand hovered for a long moment. Then she signed. Her signature sliced across the page like a blade. Clean, final, decisive. The room felt suddenly too quiet. She stood, gathered the documents, and headed for the press office on the floor above. Within 30 minutes, she had summoned every major news network in the city. Within 40, the building was swarming with reporters holding microphones, cameras, lights that burned through every shadow. Carolyn stepped onto the stage, hair still messy from the rain, coat damp around the edges, face bare and unguarded. She didn't care. What she was about to do wasn't about looking polished. It was about finally telling the truth. The cameras flashed. The crowd hushed. Manhattan held its breath. She leaned into the podium. "Good evening," she began. "Tonight, I want to address something personal, something critical, something that defines who I am and what this company stands for." Behind her, the giant screen lit up with a photo. Not of her, not of her company, not of an award or a graph showing rising profits, but of a small hand holding out a bowl of soup. Mia's hand. A ripple moved through the room. Caroline continued, voice steady, but full of something raw, something defiant. "A few nights ago, Hugh, I found myself in a place I never expected, standing alone on a street in the rain on the eve of my birthday. I was sad. I was cold. I was lost." She paused, letting the silence hold her words. "And a little girl who had almost nothing walked up to me and sang happy birthday. She gave me warmth when I had given up looking for it. She and her father invited me into their home with a kindness that changed everything." People leaned forward. "This company has lost its humanity," she said, her voice sharpened with truth. "But that man and his daughter reminded me what it looks like, what it feels like. And I will not allow anyone, inside or outside this building, to harm them for it." Then she dropped the bomb. "As of tonight, I am removing Diane Porter from her position. Effective immediately." Reporters erupted. She raised a hand, quieting them instantly. "And that's only the beginning." Cameras zoomed closer. "I am buying out the remaining shares of Hayes Dynamics. I am resuming full control, and I am using that control to launch a new initiative, one that supports families like theirs, one that protects the people we should have been protecting all along." The screen behind her shifted again, this time showing the logo of a brand new foundation. Bridge of Hands. This initiative, Carolyn said, will be led by the man who inspired it. A gasp swept through the room. Mr. Andre Collins! A wave of applause, surprise, confusion. Caroline let them react. Let New York tremble. Because tonight, she wasn't just reclaiming a company. She was reclaiming a purpose, a heartbeat, a family. But as the applause dimmed, a reporter in the front row raised his hand. Ms. Hayes, he asked, has Mr. Collins accepted the position? The room quieted. Caroline hesitated. Just a second. Just long enough. Then she answered with honesty, he hasn't responded yet. Gasps again. Cameras flashed. Whispers filled the hall. Because no one could believe it. Andre Collins had turned down a billionaire. And somewhere across the city, in a motel room paid for with the last bills in his wallet, Andre sat on the edge of a bed, staring at the flickering TV screen. Watching her announcement. Watching her offer. Watching the entire city call his name. And he whispered, with a heaviness that cut deeper than any insult Diane had thrown, I can't go back to a world that breaks people like us. He turned the TV off. Mia crawled into his lap, resting her small head against his chest. Daddy, she murmured, are we ever going to see her again? Andre didn't answer, because he didn't know. And that uncertainty hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. The motel room was quiet, except for the hum of the old heater pushing out lukewarm air. The carpet smelled faintly of bleach and dust. The wallpaper curled at the corners. It wasn't home, not even close, but for now it was the only roof Andre could afford. Mia was asleep against his shoulder, small fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt, like she feared he might disappear if she let go. Andre held her tightly, staring at the blank TV screen long after turning it off. The blue glow faded from the room, leaving him in a dim, heavy silence. He should have felt proud. Someone like him being offered a leadership position by a billionaire. He should have felt chosen, appreciated, seen. But all he felt was the weight of old wounds pressing against his ribs. A soft knock made him flinch. He stood slowly, careful not to wake Mia, and walked to the door. He peered through the peephole. Caroline. She looked different in the dim hallway. No entourage, no limousine, no polished corporate armor. Her hair was messy from the wind, her coat clutched around her like she wasn't sure she deserved warmth. Her eyes looked tired, and hopeful, and scared. Andre opened the door an inch. How did you find us? She lifted a small notepad. The manager, I asked politely, and paid his security deposit. Andre sighed, defeated. You didn't have to do that. Yes, she whispered. I did. He didn't invite her in. She didn't try to force her way. They stood in the half-open doorway, the thin motel hallway light flickering above them like it was struggling just as much as they were. Andre, she began softly. I didn't know Diane came to your home. I didn't know she said those things. When I found out, She said what she said because she believes it, Andre cut in. Because a lot of people believe it. Caroline swallowed. But I don't. That's not enough. His voice wasn't angry. It was tired. Tired in the way people get when they have been fighting the same battle since childhood. Caroline hesitated. Can I come in? He looked back at the room, at the peeling wallpaper, the second-hand clothes folded on the chair, the half-eaten convenience store dinner on the nightstand, and shame twisted in his chest. No, he said quietly. Not tonight. She didn't take offense. She simply nodded. Then, can we talk out here? Andre stepped into the hallway, leaving the door cracked so he could hear Mia if she stirred. Caroline took a slow breath. I meant it when I said I wanted you to lead the foundation. I trust you. I believe in you. I want to build something good with you. And what happens the next time someone like her tries to tear it down? Andre asked, voice low. What happens when the press starts digging through my past? Or Mia's? What happens when they see my old eviction records? Or when someone recognizes me from the day I was fired and escorted out like I was trash? Carolyn's expression softened with heartbreak. You were fired because of discrimination. That wasn't your fault. He shook his head. It doesn't matter whose fault it was. People don't care. They see a black man being escorted out, and they turn it into a story they already believe. Caroline stepped closer. Andre, tell me what happened. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he leaned against the wall, as if the story itself was heavy enough to make him need support. I used to work maintenance at a corporate office in Midtown, he began quietly. Good job, stable. I was proud of it. One day, a laptop went missing from an executive's office. No proof, no cameras, no nothing. But someone said they saw me around that floor earlier, and suddenly, that was enough. Caroline's heart dropped. They brought security, he continued, voice cracking. Walked me out during lunch hour. Everyone watching, whispering, recording. I tried to explain, but no one listened. I lost my job, lost my apartment. Mia was 4. We slept in the car until I found shelter programs. Caroline closed her eyes against the sting. I rebuilt, he said. Took any job I could find. Eventually got this place, and for a while it felt like we were okay again. Until you came along. She blinked, startled. Me? You're not the problem, he sighed. It's everything that follows you. Everything your world brings with it. I'm not made for headlines, Carolyn. They crush people like me. Her throat tightened. Then let me shield you. Let me fix this. You can't fix what the world sees when it looks at me. His words were simple, quiet, and true. Caroline stepped even closer, voice trembling. But what do you see when you look at me? Someone who wants to use you, hurt you, shame you. Andre shook his head instantly. No, never. I know you're good. I know you're sincere. But sincerity doesn't stop people like Diane, or the ones she answers to. Caroline exhaled slowly. I want to protect you, but I can't do that if you won't let me in. Andre looked at her then, really looked at her, at the fear in her eyes, at the determination, at the loneliness she carried like a shadow she couldn't shake. For a brief moment, his expression softened. I'm not leaving because of you, he said. I'm leaving because Mia's heart got cracked tonight, and I can't let that keep happening. Caroline's voice splintered. I would never let anyone hurt her. But you can't control the world, he whispered. You can't control what they say, or how they twist things. And she's too young to understand why some people think we don't belong in your life. A tear slipped down her cheek. Andre didn't reach to wipe it, but he wanted to. Please, she whispered, voice breaking. Don't walk away. He looked at her one last time, long enough for her to see the conflict tearing him apart. Then he stepped back toward the door. Good night, Caroline. She stood there, frozen, as he closed the door between them with a soft, final click. It was a gentle sound, but it felt like a fracture. Caroline pressed a hand to the door, even though she knew he wasn't standing on the other side anymore. Inside, Andre returned to the bed. Mia stirred, curling closer to him in her sleep. He stroked her hair slowly, staring at the ceiling. I'm doing the right thing, he whispered to himself. But the words tasted like ash. Outside the motel, Caroline walked back to her car, her steps unsteady, her breath uneven. The city around her buzzed with life. Cars zipping, sirens wailing, neon lights flickering. But she felt unbearably alone again. As she sat in the back seat, she whispered something she hadn't said aloud in years. I can't lose them. Her driver glanced at her through the mirror. Ma'am? Take me to the foundation office, she murmured. We're not done. Because even if Andre had closed the door, she wasn't finished fighting for them. Not yet. The night swallowed Caroline whole as her car cut through the streets of Manhattan. Rain misted the windshield, blurry streetlights stretching into streaks of gold. She sat in the back seat with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles blanched. Every breath felt thin. Every heartbeat felt like an echo. She had faced boardrooms, hostile shareholders, global crises. But nothing frightened her like losing the only two people who had shown her genuine warmth in years. When the car stopped in front of the newly rented foundation office, a small space she'd secured overnight, Caroline stepped out into the cold air. She unlocked the glass door, turned on the lights, and stood there alone among blank walls and unopened boxes. Her entire empire couldn't fill the ache in her chest. She sank into a folding chair, elbows on her knees, head in her hands. For the first time in a long, long time. Carolyn Hayes felt helpless. Across town, in the dim motel room, Andre lay awake long after Mia drifted off into an exhausted sleep. Shadows from the neon sign outside flashed against the faded curtains, bathing the room in intermittent red. Andre's thoughts looped like a broken record. Caroline at the door. Caroline's eyes shining with something real. Caroline begging him not to walk away. He wished he could stop thinking about her. Stop remembering the way she softened around Mia. Stop replaying how she'd said, I would never let anyone hurt her. But he couldn't. Because some part of him, some quiet, buried part, believed her. He just didn't know how to trust that feeling. Not after a lifetime of bruises that didn't leave marks, just memories. Sometime past midnight, he finally drifted off. He didn't hear the rumble of a car pulling up outside the motel. He didn't hear the soft footsteps approaching. He didn't hear the gentle knock at the door. But Mia did. Her eyes fluttered open. She slid out of bed, tiny feet silent on the carpet. Andre stirred slightly, but didn't wake as she tiptoed to the door. She pressed her ear against it. Miss Caroline? She whispered. A soft gasp answered her. Mia? Mia unlocked the chain and cracked the door open. Caroline stood there, hair damp from the mist, coat wrinkled, eyes red-rimmed. She had never looked less like a billionaire, or more like someone who desperately needed kindness. Mia didn't hesitate. She opened the door wider and stepped back without a word. Caroline entered quietly, her eyes immediately landing on Andre asleep on the bed, one arm protectively over the space where Mia had been. She whispered, You should be asleep too, sweetheart. Mia shook her head. I heard you. Caroline knelt down so they were eye to eye. I shouldn't be here this late. I'm sorry. You're not scary, Mia said softly. Not like that lady. Caroline swallowed hard. I wish I could undo what she did. Mia's small brows furrowed. She said we don't belong with you. The pain that washed over Caroline's face made Mia step forward and take her hand, small fingers curling around hers. We liked having you with us, Mia said. You smiled different. Caroline blinked, tears building. Sweetheart. Before she could finish, Andre woke, eyes snapping open at the sight of Caroline in the room. He bolted upright. Mia, you can't just open the... But he stopped mid-sentence, breath catching. Caroline stood there, not moving, her hand still held by his daughter. For a moment, the room froze. Andre's voice was guarded, quiet. Caroline, you shouldn't be here. I know, she whispered, but I couldn't lie awake wondering if the two of you were okay. We're fine, he said, though his tone wasn't harsh, just resigned. Mia tugged gently on his shirt. Daddy. She looks sad. Andre exhaled slowly. Mia, why don't you go sit for a minute? Daddy needs to talk. But Mia didn't let go of Carolyn's hand. Instead, she looked between them with the clarity only children have, the kind adults lose somewhere between heartbreak and adulthood. Finally, she asked, Daddy? Miss Caroline? Do you need us? The room fell utterly silent. Andre stared at his daughter, her earnest eyes, her trembling little chin. His throat closed. Caroline's breath hitched. Because that one question, simple, innocent, pure, held more truth than anything either of them had been willing to admit. Do you need us? Not, do you want help? Not, do you feel sorry? Not, do you owe us? But, do you need us? Caroline knelt in front of Mia again, her voice unsteady. Yes, she whispered. I do. I need you both more than I can explain. Andre felt something in his chest crack wide open. Mia turned to him. Daddy? He tried to speak. His voice broke. I don't know how to need people anymore, baby. Mia Puhke reached for his hand, guiding it toward Caroline's. Maybe we can learn together. The gesture was small, but it felt monumental. Andre looked at Caroline, really looked. She wasn't a billionaire in that moment. She wasn't a CEO or a public figure or a woman surrounded by power. She was just a human being standing on the edge of something she didn't know how to navigate, reaching out in the dark for someone who had once pulled her out of the rain. His voice barely rose above a whisper. I'm scared. So am I, she said softly. Why? He asked. Because losing you two, she answered, feels like losing the only thing that's felt real in years. Andre's eyes glistened, and for the first time since Diane had stepped into their home, the weight began to lift. The fear didn't vanish. The wounds didn't magically heal. But in that motel room, with peeling wallpaper and flickering neon light, something fragile and sacred started to rebuild itself. Not trust. Not yet. But hope. Caroline squeezed both their hands. I promise, she whispered, voice trembling but certain. I'll never let anything happen to you again. Andre nodded slowly. Not yes, not no, but maybe. And sometimes, maybe is the first step toward healing. Outside, dawn was beginning to stretch across the sky, painting the horizon with the first hints of gold. A new day, a new beginning, and something none of them could have predicted, a birthday on the horizon that wouldn't just change one woman's life, but an entire city's. The morning sun broke over New York in soft gold ribbons, warming rooftops, bridges, and busy sidewalks. But in a small motel room in the Bronx, warmth came from somewhere much closer, from three people sitting together at a tiny table, sharing a simple breakfast of toast and fruit. No tension, no fear, just quiet understanding. Andre sipped his coffee, glancing at Carolyn from time to time as if trying to gauge whether the night before had been real. Caroline sat cross-legged in a chair too small for her, helping Mia peel an orange with the kind of focused tenderness she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Every so often, Mia would look up, grin, and press a slice into Caroline's hand. You have to eat breakfast, Mia told her. It makes you strong. Caroline smiled, tears threatening but not breaking. I think you're the one making me strong. Andre watched them, his daughter's ease, Caroline's softness, and felt something inside him shift, like a locked door opening for the first time in a long time. After breakfast, he cleared his throat. "So, what happens now?" Caroline folded her hands. "Now? Now we fix everything. Together." "Together?" Andre repeated quietly. "If you'll let me," she said. "If you'll stay." There were 1,000 reasons to say no, 1,000 scars whispering, "Be careful." But Mia spoke first. "We should stay," she said with childlike certainty. "She needs us." Andre let out a slow breath. "Then we stay." Caroline almost broke into tears, but she didn't cry. She stood. "Then come with me," she said. "There's something I want to show you." By early afternoon, the three of them stood in front of a large brick building in Midtown, once abandoned, now freshly painted, with new windows reflecting the sky. A new sign hung over the entrance. "Bridge of Hands Community Center." Andre stared, stunned. "You bought this place?" "I bought it," Carolyn said. "And the two buildings on either side. It's a full renovation project. Food pantry, daycare support, tutoring rooms, job training. It's everything I wished existed for families like yours. Like ours." "Ours," Andre echoed under his breath. Caroline pushed open the door. Inside, dozens of workers were setting up tables, testing microphones, hanging banners. The air smelled of sawdust, fresh paint, and warm pastries from a nearby bakery. A stage had been erected at the far end of the room, simple but bright. Mia gasped. "What's all this for?" Caroline crouched beside her. "For people who deserve more than they've been given, including you." A volunteer approached. "Ms. Hayes, everything is ready. The guests will start arriving soon." "Guests?" Andre repeated. "For what?" Caroline hesitated, looking almost shy. "For my birthday." Andre blinked. "You're celebrating here?" "No," she said softly. "I'm celebrating with you." As the afternoon faded into evening, something extraordinary began to happen. Cars lined the street. Neighbors from blocks away came carrying homemade dishes. Families from the shelters arrived with shy smiles. Kids ran inside wearing jackets too big or too small. Volunteers handed out hot chocolate. Word spread through the Bronx, Harlem, Brooklyn, everywhere Caroline had quietly visited over the past weeks. And soon, the hall was filled with hundreds of people. People who had never been invited to a billionaire's birthday. People who had never stood inside a space built for them, not around them. Soft music played from speakers. The lights dimmed. The chatter faded. Caroline walked onto the stage. She wore no evening gown, no diamonds, just a simple white sweater and slacks. But she glowed. "Thank you for being here," she began, her voice trembling into the microphone. "I used to celebrate my birthday in a penthouse, surrounded by things that never filled the emptiness I felt. But then, one night, two people I'd never met welcomed me into their home." The crowd turned to look at Andre and Mia. "They fed me dinner," Carolyn continued. "They made me feel like I mattered. They didn't know my name. They didn't want anything from me. They simply saw a woman alone on her birthday. And they cared." She paused, breath shaking. "That moment changed everything." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a single item wrapped in a napkin. Mia covered her mouth, eyes widening. It was the cookie. The one she had broken in half to share with Caroline on that first cold night. Caroline lifted it gently. "This cookie reminded me what real kindness looks like, and I want to honor that kindness today." Andre swallowed hard, chest tight. Caroline gestured toward him. "This man taught me that dignity isn't measured in wealth or titles, and this little girl, She smiled at Mia. She gave me back a part of myself I thought was gone forever. A soft murmur of emotion swept through the audience. Caroline took a steadying breath. So today, in honor of them, and in honor of every family who has ever been overlooked or underestimated, I'm making one final announcement. She turned to the crowd. Effective immediately, I am transferring 20% of my personal wealth to the Bridge of Hands Foundation. The funds will be permanently locked for community support, childcare, education grants, and emergency assistance. The room erupted. Applause thundered. People cried openly. Some hugged each other like they had just witnessed a miracle. Andre stood frozen. Carolyn stepped down from the stage and moved toward him, slow, steady, heart in her eyes. I don't want to build this alone, she said quietly over the noise. I want you beside me, as director, as a partner, as family, if you'll have me. Andre didn't speak. His voice was gone, but Mia stepped between them, smiling brighter than any light in the room, and took Caroline's hand. Then she took her father's, and she pressed their hands together. Andre's breath shook. Caroline's eyes filled, and the entire city seemed to hold its breath, until Andre finally whispered, We'll do this together. Cheers exploded again. Music swelled. Volunteers brought out a giant birthday cake decorated by neighborhood kids. The first slice went to Mia, of course. The second went to Andre. And the third? Caroline handed it to a mother she'd never met, smiling through tears, as candles flickered and laughter filled the hall. The camera crews that gathered earlier captured a moment New York would never forget. A billionaire finding her family among those who had the least. A community rising together. A single dad finally being seen for the good man he always was. And a little girl whose song in the rain changed everything. Carolyn stood on the stage one last time, watching the joy ripple through the room. She whispered, soft as a prayer, Thank you for bringing me home. And somewhere in the Bronx, in the heart of a city that often moved too fast to care, kindness won, again and again. If this story touched your heart even a little, drop a simple 1 in the comments so I know you're still here, still believing in kindness. And if you'd like to travel with us through more stories of hope, healing, and second chances, make sure you subscribe and turn on the bell. Your one small comment keeps these stories alive and brings the next one a little closer.